The air was thick with dust, and the tunnels shook with the sound of metal striking stone. Sparks jumped when pickaxes hit the crystal walls, and the cries of tired workers echoed in the darkness. The alien girl's hands were raw, her fingers cracked from years of scraping sharp rocks. Every day was the same. She bent her back, pulled heavy carts filled with glowing ore, and listened to the guards shouting orders from the shadows. The mines had no sun, no sky, only endless black stone and the dim glow of crystals that gave off a sickly green light. Her body was small, thinner than it should have been, but her eyes told the truth of her life, eyes that had seen too much pain and carried no hope. She had been taken when she was young. She did not even remember the color of the sky above her home anymore. The mines had stolen her childhood, her laughter, even her dreams. She knew nothing but chains, dust, and darkness. Chains rattled whenever she moved. Each slave had a collar of steel connected to a glowing lock that shocked them if they slowed down. The guards liked using the whips, and sometimes they would whip even if someone worked fast, just to remind them of control. She had scars across her back that would never heal. Pain was part of life here, and silence was survival. Around her, hundreds of others worked like machines. Some coughed blood, some collapsed, and never rose again. The guards would not stop to check. They would only drag the body away and bring another slave in its place. For years she had watched this cycle, and every time it happened, a piece of her heart grew colder. She had learned to keep her eyes down, to never speak unless spoken to, and to move her body even when it screamed for rest. She remembered once, long ago, she had cried. A guard had slapped her until she could no longer feel her face. That was the day she had learned to never cry again. Tears meant weakness, and weakness meant death. So she buried her emotions deep inside, hiding them where even she could not reach. The ore they mined was precious to the masters. It glowed in strange colors when refined, used to power weapons and ships. The slaves never saw its beauty. To them, it was only weight, pain, and suffering. She hated the crystals. Their light burned her eyes, and their sharp edges tore her skin. Still, she carried them because she had no choice. On this day, something different happened. She was pushing a cart down a narrow tunnel, her arms trembling, when the ground shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the walls cracked with loud groans. An explosion echoed deeper in the mine. Slaves screamed as rocks fell from above. She dropped to the ground, covering her head, heart pounding, as the tunnel filled with the roar of collapsing stone. When the dust settled, silence followed, broken only by coughing. She sat up slowly, her body shaking, and looked ahead. A large chunk of rock had crashed into the tunnel floor, splitting open like an egg. From beneath it came a hand, bloody, trembling, but alive. Her eyes widened. It was not the hand of one of her kind. The skin was different, pale, rough. She crawled closer, pulling away chunks of stone with shaking fingers. Underneath the rubble lay a figure. His clothes were torn, covered in dirt, but she had never seen such clothes before. Thick fabric, stitched strong, nothing like the rags the slaves wore. His face was hidden behind blood and dust, but she could see enough to know he was not one of them. He was a human. Her heart thumped faster. She had heard whispers in the mines, rumors of strange creatures captured and brought here. But she had never seen one. The guards always kept them hidden, or killed them if they resisted. Why was he here? How had he survived under the rocks? The man groaned, his eyes fluttering open. They were unlike anything she had seen, deep and sharp, filled with pain yet burning with something else she did not recognize. He looked at her, really looked, not the way guards looked at slaves like dirt, but with a flicker of recognition, as if she were not invisible. His lips cracked as he whispered, "Don't, leave me here." Her breath caught. No one had ever asked her for help before. No one had ever spoken to her like she mattered. She looked around quickly. The guards were far away, shouting orders at the other end of the tunnel. She should not stay here. If they caught her helping him, she would be beaten, maybe even killed. Every instinct told her to walk away. Survival meant obedience. Survival meant silence. But her body did not move away. Instead, she touched his arm, feeling the heat of his blood. For a moment, memories she had buried rose back up. Memories of her family, of voices that had once spoken to her with care. She had forgotten what kindness felt like, but now it returned in a strange way. This man was a stranger. Yet his weak plea shook something inside her. She pulled at the stones with desperate strength, ignoring the pain in her hands. One by one, she cleared the rubble from his body. He gasped in pain, but he did not push her away. His trust was silent but strong, and she found herself moving faster, as if saving him meant saving a piece of herself too. Finally, his legs were free, though badly bruised. He tried to rise but fell back down, breathing hard. She grabbed a torn cloth from his side and pressed it against his wound. Her hands trembled. She had never done this before, but her heart guided her. He looked at her again, eyes full of exhaustion yet alive. In the darkness of the mines, surrounded by chains and cruelty, a strange spark had been born. For the first time in years, she did not feel completely alone. She had no name for this feeling, but she knew it was dangerous. If the guards found out, it would cost her life. Still, she stayed by his side, listening to his weak breaths, her own heart racing with fear and something she could not explain. Would this moment vanish like all others? Or had the mines just opened a path to something she had never believed possible? Change? The man's breathing was heavy, every breath rough like stones grinding together. The alien girl knelt close, her eyes darting nervously down the tunnel. The guards were still shouting orders far away, but their voices echoed, and she knew they could return at any moment. She had never felt her heart beat so fast. It hammered against her chest, as if it wanted to break free. She should not be here, she told herself. Helping him was dangerous. Yet her hands refused to let go of the cloth pressed against his wound. The human opened his eyes again, his gaze weak but steady. His lips moved slowly, words coming out like broken whispers. Please, don't leave me. His voice was unlike anything she had ever heard, deeper, softer, carrying something strange, something gentle. It was not a command, not an order like the guards barked, but a request. The sound of it made her freeze. No one had ever asked her for anything. No one had spoken to her as if she had a choice. Her first instinct was to look away, to hide her face. She had been trained to be invisible, to never let the guards see her emotions. But his eyes did not look at her with cruelty. They looked at her like she mattered, like she was not just another slave. That small difference shook her more than the explosions that had rocked the tunnels earlier. The man winced as he tried to sit up. She quickly reached out to steady him, her thin hands gripping his arm. His skin was rough, scarred, and warm with blood. He leaned against the tunnel wall, breathing hard. She could smell the dust and iron of the mine mixing with the strange scent of him. He was not like her people, and yet something about him felt closer than anyone she had ever known. She whispered, her voice shaky and unused to speaking. You should not be here. He gave a weak laugh, though it turned into a cough. I know, but neither should you. His words confused her. She had always believed she had no choice. Slaves belonged in the mines. That was the rule of the world. But he said it so easily, as if she did not belong here, as if this life was wrong. Her hands trembled as she pulled out another sharp rock stuck near his side. He groaned in pain, but did not push her away. She tore a piece of her own ragged sleeve and pressed it against his wound to stop the bleeding. He looked at her with a faint smile, his voice soft. Thank you. Those two words hit her harder than any whip ever had. No one had thanked her before. She worked every day, carried stones until her back broke, and still the guards only beat her. To hear gratitude, it felt like sunlight piercing the endless dark of the mines. She lowered her head quickly, afraid he might see the emotion rising in her eyes. Time felt dangerous now. Every second near him risked discovery. She listened to the distant clatter of chains and boots. If a guard came, they would both suffer. Still, she could not make herself leave. Her body remained rooted to the spot beside him, her mind caught between fear and something new, something she did not understand. The man shifted slightly, his face pale from blood loss. What's your name? He asked. She froze. Her name. She had not heard it in years. The guards had stripped names away, calling slaves only by numbers. She had buried her own so deep she almost forgot it. She shook her head quickly, whispering, I have no name. His brows furrowed, and for a moment he looked angry, but not at her. Angry for her. Everyone has a name, he said, his voice firm despite his weakness. No one can take that from you. Her throat tightened. She turned her head away, unable to answer. His words felt dangerous. They stirred things she had killed inside herself long ago, memories of her family calling her name, of laughter before the mines, memories that hurt too much to hold. She pushed them down, but they pressed against her like fire. The man leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. Then he whispered, "I'm Daniel." She looked at him quickly, shocked. He had given her his name, freely, without hesitation. Her lips parted, but no sound came. No one shared such things here. Names were power, and yet he had handed his to her like a gift. Her heart raced faster. She whispered the word softly, testing it, afraid the stones might echo it too loudly. Daniel. It felt strange on her tongue, yet it carried a warmth she could not explain. He opened his eyes again and managed a faint smile when he heard her say it. For a moment, the mine's darkness seemed less heavy. The endless chains, the endless dust, all of it felt distant. There was only her, this wounded human, and the strange, fragile bond forming between them. She did not know why, but she felt that if she left him now, something inside her would die forever. But fear still lived in her bones. Heavy footsteps echoed faintly from deeper in the tunnel. She froze, her breath sharp. The guards. Her heart slammed against her ribs. If they found her with him, both of them would suffer in ways she did not want to imagine. She looked at him quickly, her whisper urgent. "I must go." His hand reached out weakly, catching her wrist. His grip was not strong, but it was enough to hold her in place. His eyes locked with hers, pleading without words. She felt torn apart inside. To stay was to risk death. To leave was to abandon the only being who had ever looked at her with humanity. For long seconds, she did not move. The tunnel around them seemed to shrink, silence pressing in heavy, broken only by the far-off shouts of the guards. His hand trembled around her wrist, but his eyes held firm. He believed she would not abandon him. Her breath shook, her chest tight, and finally she nodded just once. Against every rule drilled into her, against every fear she carried, she stayed. She pressed his wound again, steadying her hands, determined now. If she was caught, so be it. For the first time in years, she had chosen something for herself. She had chosen to help him. In that silent vow, something shifted inside her. The mines had stolen everything from her, her childhood, her freedom, even her name. But in this single fragile moment, with a broken human whispering thanks through the dust, she realized the mines had not killed her spirit completely. Somewhere deep inside, it still lived. And now, because of him, it was waking up again. The tunnels were quiet except for the faint dripping of water from the ceiling. Dust floated in the dim green glow of the crystals, and the girl sat close to Daniel, her body tense and alert. He was breathing better now, though his face was still pale. His eyes followed her carefully, studying every movement, and she found herself uncomfortable under that gaze. Not because it was cruel, but because it was gentle, searching, alive in a way she had never seen. He shifted slightly, grimacing from the pain in his side. She reached out without thinking, steadying him. He gave her a small nod of thanks, and for a moment she felt strange warmth bloom inside her chest. She pulled her hand back quickly, afraid of that feeling, afraid of what it meant. No slave was supposed to feel anything. Feelings only made the days longer and the punishments sharper. But sitting with him, she could not stop the thoughts flooding her mind. Daniel broke the silence. His voice was hoarse but steady. "How long? Have you been here?" She lowered her eyes. "Years." She did not count anymore. Counting only made it worse. She had stopped after her second year. Now it was only endless days, endless chains. His jaw tightened. Years in this place? He glanced around the tunnel, his eyes narrowing at the broken carts and the piles of ore glowing faintly. His face showed disgust, not at her, but at what had been done to her and the others. She had never seen someone look at the mines like that. Most people just accepted it, but this human's eyes burned with anger for her. She frowned, confused. "Why are you here? You are not like us." He gave a tired laugh, though it carried no joy. "I was a soldier. My ship was ambushed. They wanted me alive, for work, maybe information." His eyes darkened, and he spat dust to the side. "But they didn't break me. Not yet." She tilted her head. His voice carried strength even while his body was weak. He spoke like someone who still believed in himself, even while chained. She could not understand it. Slaves forgot belief on the first day. That was how they survived. Yet Daniel held on to something else, something she had no name for. She whispered, "You should not speak like that. If the guards hear." He turned his eyes on her, sharp but not unkind. "Do you want to spend the rest of your life in chains?" The words cut into her like knives. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She had never asked herself that question. Life in chains had become normal. There was no choice. No one had ever told her there could be another way. She stared at him, her chest tight, her heart hammering, as if those words had cracked open a wall inside her. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There's always a way out. Always." She shook her head quickly. "No. If we try, we die. I have seen it. Many times." He did not argue. Instead, he gave her a long look, then whispered, "Tell me about this place. Tell me where the guards move, where the tunnels go." Her eyes widened. She glanced around in panic. "If I speak of it, if anyone hears." Her voice cracked. "No one will hear," he said firmly. His tone was calm but full of certainty. He leaned his head back against the wall and let out a slow breath. "If you trust me, we can find a way." Trust. The word echoed in her head. She had never trusted anyone in the mines. Trust was dangerous. Friends turned on each other to survive. Secrets killed faster than hunger. But here was this broken human, bleeding and weak, asking her to trust him. She should have laughed, should have walked away, but she couldn't. Her hands curled into fists. Slowly, carefully, she whispered, "There are tunnels the guards don't use. Old tunnels. Collapsed in places. Dangerous." His eyes snapped open at that. He listened, silent, as she continued in a trembling voice. "Some lead outside the mine, but no one goes. Too much risk. The walls fall. The air is poison in parts." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's where we'll go." Her stomach twisted. "You don't understand. Those tunnels kill." He gave a faint smile, even through the pain. "So do these chains." For a long time, she stared at him, her mind torn. She had spent her whole life avoiding hope because hope hurt more than whips. But his words planted a seed she could not stop. She hated him for it, and yet could not look away. Before she could answer, the ground trembled. A deep groan echoed through the rock as another collapse shook the tunnel. Stones rained from the ceiling, dust filling the air. She coughed, shielding her face. Daniel tried to move, his body weak, but she grabbed him, pulling him down as a section of the wall cracked open with a loud roar. When the dust settled, they found themselves in a half-buried passage, darker than the others. The air was cold and smelled of old earth. The girl's heart thudded as she realized what it was, one of the forbidden tunnels. Daniel's eyes lit up with fierce determination. He tried to stand, leaning heavily on the wall. "See?" he said, his voice rough but strong. "The way out is already opening." Fear gripped her chest. She pulled him back down quickly, whispering harshly, "No, the guards will hear if they find us here." But even as she said it, she knew something had changed. The tunnel gaped before them like a mouth, silent, waiting. It was a choice she had never thought she would face. Her hands shook as she looked at Daniel. He was weak, close to collapse, yet his eyes shone with a fire that refused to die. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe there was another path, no matter how dangerous. The sound of boots echoed faintly in the distance. Guards were coming closer, their voices sharp, calling out orders. She panicked, her body frozen between fear of being caught and the strange pull of this new path. Daniel grabbed her wrist again, his grip trembling but sure. "Trust me," he whispered. The words sank deep inside her. Trust. She had buried that long ago. But now, as the shadows closed in and the forbidden tunnel loomed beside them, she felt her heart shift in a way she could not explain. For the first time in years, she did not look down at the ground in silence. She looked into his eyes, and though her voice was barely more than a breath, she said, "I will try." The tunnel was silent, except for their breathing. Dust still floated in the air, and the new crack in the wall yawned open like a dark mouth. The alien girl's hands trembled as she held Daniel's arm, steadying him as he tried to stand. His legs shook, but his eyes burned with a strange strength. He should have been broken, yet he was not. She wondered how someone so weak in body could look so unbroken in spirit. Daniel leaned heavily on her shoulder, every step slow and painful. She felt his weight pressing against her, and though her body was thin and tired, she did not let him fall. They moved deeper into the cracked tunnel, hidden from the main shafts. Every sound of falling stones or dripping water made her flinch, but he whispered, "It's safer here. No guards." She wanted to argue, to tell him nothing was safe, but she kept her voice inside. As they walked, she noticed how different he was. Even in pain, he still looked at everything carefully, studying the walls, the rocks, the faint glow of the ore. She had spent years ignoring the mines, seeing them only as chains and suffering. He saw them as something to escape through. His way of looking at the world was strange to her, frightening even, but it was also hopeful. She hated hope. It hurt. And yet, walking beside him, she could not push it away. When they reached a narrow place where the tunnel had half collapsed, Daniel slipped. She caught him, pulling hard with all her strength. His arm wrapped around her for balance, and for a moment their faces were close. She saw the pain lines etched in his skin, the tiredness in his eyes, but also the small smile that appeared as he said, "You're stronger than you look." Her heart jumped at those words. No one had ever told her she was strong. To the guards, she was nothing, just a tool. To other slaves, she was invisible. But this man, half broken and bleeding, still saw strength in her. She looked away quickly, her cheeks hot even in the cold air. They squeezed through the tight gap in the rocks. The passage beyond was silent and heavy with stale air. Daniel leaned against the wall, breathing hard, while she crouched to check if the way was clear. In the silence, he spoke softly. "You saved me. Why?" She froze. She had no answer. She wanted to say she didn't know, that it had been a mistake, that she should have left him to die. But her lips refused to form the words. Finally, she whispered, "Because you asked me. No one ever asked before." He looked at her for a long time, his eyes soft. Then he said, "Then maybe you've saved yourself too." Her chest tightened at those words, like something deep inside her had cracked open. She turned away, pretending to study the rocks, but his voice stayed in her ears, making her wonder what he meant. They rested for a short while, the girl listening carefully for guard voices. Far away, she heard shouts, chains clattering, boots striking stone. The collapse had drawn attention, and the guards were searching. She leaned closer to Daniel, whispering, "We must move before they find us." He nodded, trying to push himself forward. His body shook with weakness, but his determination was clear. She guided him carefully, and together they made their way deeper into the shadows. The tunnel forked, one path sloping downward into darkness, the other twisting upward. She hesitated, fear tightening her throat. She had heard slaves whisper about these tunnels. Some led to dead ends, some to poisoned air, some to freedom. She never believed freedom was real. Now Daniel's eyes shone with certainty. "Up," he said simply. She almost argued, but stopped. Something about his voice carried a weight she could not resist. So she nodded and helped him climb. The way was steep. At one point, a section of rock gave way under her foot, sending stones crashing down. She gasped, clinging to the wall. Daniel reached out with his trembling arm, steadying her this time. His grip was weak but firm enough to stop her from falling. She stared at him in shock. Even half broken, he had saved her. "You see?" he whispered with a faint smile. "We keep each other alive." The words echoed in her chest. She had never thought of survival as something shared. For her, it was always alone, silent, cold, and cruel. But now, walking with him, holding him up and being held in return, survival felt different. It felt possible. They climbed higher, and soon the sound of boots grew louder from behind. Guards were closer now, their voices sharp and angry. Fear rushed through her veins like fire. She pressed Daniel against the wall, both of them holding still as the echo of footsteps neared. Her hand gripped his tightly, her breath shallow. She was certain they would be found. A beam of torchlight flickered at the far edge of the tunnel, and shadows of guards stretched across the walls. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, his whisper calm. "Don't be afraid." She wanted to laugh at that. How could she not be afraid? But when she looked into his eyes, something in her calmed. He was bleeding, broken and weak, yet his gaze was steady, strong. She leaned closer, hiding in the darkness with him, and for a terrifying heartbeat, she felt safe. The guards passed without noticing, their footsteps fading into another branch of the mine. She exhaled slowly, her entire body shaking. Daniel's hand was still in hers, warm despite his weakness. She realized she had not let go even after the danger had passed. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she pulled her hand back, staring at the ground to hide her face. They continued climbing, silence heavy between them. But inside, the silence was not empty. It was full of unspoken thoughts, fears, and something fragile that was beginning to grow. She could not name it, but it frightened her more than the guards. At last, they reached a wider space where broken beams and rusted chains hung from the ceiling. It looked like an old working shaft, long abandoned. Dust covered everything. Daniel lowered himself against a wall, exhausted. She crouched near him, watching his chest rise and fall. "You should rest," she whispered. He shook his head weakly, smiling faintly. "No, if I rest, I might not get up again. And I want to see the sky." Her breath caught. The sky. The words stabbed her like a forgotten memory. She had not seen the sky in years, maybe since childhood. She almost doubted it was real anymore. And yet, hearing him say it made something ache deep inside her. For the first time in years, she let herself imagine it. Open air, sunlight, freedom, a world beyond stone and chains. The thought terrified her, but it also made her heart beat faster with longing. She looked at Daniel, his eyes half closed, but still burning with determination, and she realized he truly believed it. For the first time, she wanted to believe it too. Daniel's breathing grew heavier as they moved deeper into the old shaft. The alien girl kept glancing back, her sharp ears listening for the sound of guards. Every distant clang of chains or echo of boots made her heart race. She knew they had little time before someone realized they were missing. Her hands shook as she pushed aside broken planks and loose stones, but Daniel's voice came softly behind her. "We can make it. Don't lose faith now." She turned to him, her eyes full of fear. "Faith will not stop them. They will find us. They always do." Daniel gave a weak smile, though his body leaned heavily against the wall. "Then we give them nothing to find." His words carried a calm certainty she could not understand. Even wounded, he spoke like a man who had already decided the outcome. It frightened her, but it also pulled her forward. They stopped in a small hollow where old mining tools lay rusted and broken. The girl crouched quickly, brushing away dust, and found scraps of rope, shattered picks, and pieces of cloth. Her fingers trembled as she gathered them. Daniel watched with tired eyes but a proud smile. "You see? Even the forgotten can be useful." She frowned. "These are worthless." "Worthless to them," he said quietly, "but not to us." She tied the scraps into knots, testing their strength. Her hands remembered movements she had not used since childhood, when she once tied small ropes for climbing trees, long before the mines stole everything. The memory stabbed her heart, but she pushed it away. She could not afford to feel. Not now. Daniel leaned closer. "You know these tunnels better than anyone. Show me the way." Her throat tightened. No one had ever asked her to lead. She had only ever followed orders, obeyed commands, and kept her head down. But he looked at her with complete trust, as if he believed she was capable of more than surviving. She swallowed hard and nodded. They moved carefully, whispering in the dark. She explained where the guards usually walked, how their rotations worked, where the ore was stored, and where the tunnels collapsed most often. Daniel listened to every word, his eyes narrowing in thought. At last he whispered, "Then we have a chance." Her chest tightened. "Chance means death." "Chance means life," he corrected gently. "Chains are death." The words sank deep into her. She wanted to argue but could not. Something inside her stirred again, that same dangerous spark that had been growing since she met him. As they continued forward, she hid the broken tools and cloth pieces in cracks along the tunnel, creating small caches. She moved with surprising skill, her hands quick, her eyes sharp. Daniel watched silently, realizing she was not just surviving, she was adapting. She had been forced to live like a slave, but she carried the instincts of someone far stronger. At one point, they heard voices echoing closer. Guards. The girl grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him into a side alcove, pressing both of them against the cold wall. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the guards would hear it. Daniel's breath warmed her ear as he leaned close, whispering, "Stay calm." 2 shadows passed, torchlight flickering on the walls. The guards cursed at the dust and shouted to each other, but they did not notice the 2 figures hiding only steps away. The girl's nails dug into the stone, her body shaking until the echoes faded. Only then did she realize Daniel's hand was covering hers, steady and firm. She pulled away quickly, but his touch lingered in her thoughts long after. When the danger passed, they rested in another collapsed chamber. Daniel coughed harshly, his wound bleeding again. She tore more cloth from her rags and pressed it against him, her hands working quickly. He winced, but did not pull away. Instead, his eyes locked on hers. "You've saved me more times than I can count already." Her hands froze. She had never saved anyone before. She had only ever tried to survive another day. His words felt heavier than the stones she carried every day, and yet warmer than anything she had known. She looked down, whispering, "Do not thank me. If they catch us, it will mean nothing." Daniel shook his head slowly. "It will mean everything. Even if we fail, at least we tried. That's more than they can take from us." She stared at him, stunned by his defiance. She wanted to believe him, but fear still chained her mind. She could not imagine freedom, not truly. And yet, she also could not ignore the fire in his eyes. They decided to move again before the guards doubled back. The girl led the way through a narrow crawl space that scraped their arms and legs raw. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. Daniel stumbled once, almost falling, but she caught him under the arm and pulled him forward with surprising strength. He looked at her in amazement, whispering, "I told you, stronger than you know." She felt heat rise in her chest again. It was dangerous, this feeling, but she could not push it away. Finally, they reached a chamber where broken support beams created a natural hiding place. The girl quickly pushed Daniel inside, covering the opening with loose rocks. They crouched together in the cramped space, close enough that their shoulders touched. In the silence, their breaths mixed, uneven and shaky. Daniel broke the silence first. "You said your name was taken." She stiffened. "Yes." His voice was firm but kind. "Then give me another, a name you choose." Her eyes widened in shock. She shook her head. "Slaves cannot choose." "You are not a slave," he said sharply. His hand touched her arm, steady, unyielding. "Not anymore. Not to me." Her throat closed, her eyes burning with tears she had promised never to shed again. No one had ever spoken to her like that. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time, she wanted to say a name, to give herself something again, but fear held her tongue. Daniel did not press. He only leaned back, eyes half closing, whispering, "One day, when you're ready." Her heart twisted painfully, but also with a strange new warmth. She did not understand it fully, but she knew this moment was different. For the first time, someone had given her the choice to be more than what the mines had forced her to be. Outside, faint echoes of guards grew louder again, reminding her that danger was never far. She pressed her back against the wall, every nerve on edge. Yet inside, in this tiny space with him, she felt something she had never felt before, something stronger than fear. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The alarm bells echoed through the tunnels, sharp and angry like the screams of dying metal. Red lights flashed against the stone walls, and the sound of boots thundered closer. The girl's heart leapt into her throat. They had been discovered. All the stolen minutes of hiding, all the whispered plans. They were finished now. Guards stormed the shafts with chains rattling and whips ready, shouting orders that shook the walls. She pulled Daniel deeper into the shadows, her body pressed against his, but there was no time left. The search had begun, and soon the guards would tear through every tunnel until they found them. Daniel's face was pale, his wound bleeding fresh again from the strain of moving. He held himself against the wall, breathing heavily, but his eyes were sharp. "We can't keep hiding," he whispered. "If they find us cornered, it's over." Her voice trembled. "If we fight, we die." He reached for her wrist, gripping it weakly, but with a strength that carried through his eyes. "If we do nothing, we die slower. At least fighting, we choose." Her body shook. Slaves did not fight. Slaves obeyed, endured, and prayed for another day. But Daniel's words pressed deep into her chest, stirring a courage she did not know she had. She looked at him, at his bloody clothes and unbroken eyes, and she nodded. The first guard's shadow stretched across the wall before his body appeared. His boots crunched on the stones as his whip dangled from his side. The girl's heart pounded so loud she thought it would betray them. She clenched the broken mining tool she had hidden earlier, the jagged edge cutting into her palm. The guard stepped closer, raising his torch. His eyes narrowed as the light fell across their corner. He opened his mouth to shout, but she moved before he could. With a cry that tore itself from years of silence, she struck him across the face with the jagged tool. Blood sprayed against the wall, and the guard collapsed with a heavy crash. Her chest heaved as she stared at what she had done. For years she had endured, for years she had obeyed, but now her hands were red with rebellion. Daniel's weak smile met her shock. "You're free the moment you stop obeying." The sound of the guard's fall echoed, and more voices shouted. They had heard. More were coming. Daniel forced himself forward, his body trembling, but his spirit blazing. He picked up the fallen guard's weapon and held it with both hands. "Stay with me," he said, his voice fierce even through his weakness. They moved quickly through the tunnels, her guiding, him supporting, both of them stumbling yet refusing to stop. Torches flared behind them as guards gave chase. The girl's breath burned in her lungs, her legs screaming with exhaustion, but fear pushed her forward. Chains rattled louder as more enemies closed in. They reached a narrow shaft, half collapsed, where rocks jutted sharp and uneven. Daniel looked at it and nodded. "We climb." She stared at him in horror. "Heights will kill us. If the rocks fall..." "If we stay, the guards will," he cut her off. Without waiting, he began climbing, his hands slipping on the jagged stone but refusing to let go. She stared for a moment, fear freezing her legs, then clenched her fists and followed. Her thin body moved quickly, years of forced labor giving her strength she had forgotten. Dust rained down as stones broke loose, and below, torches filled the shaft as guards shouted, their whips lashing the walls. Halfway up, Daniel slipped. His grip faltered, his body tilting back. Without thinking, she reached down, her small hand locking around his wrist. Her arms shook with effort as she held him, teeth clenched, her heart racing. "Climb!" she hissed. His eyes met hers, burning even in his pain. Slowly, with her strength pulling him upward, he found his hold again. They climbed together, their breaths ragged, until at last they reached the top ledge. She collapsed beside him, her chest heaving, her hands bloody from torn skin. But there was no time to rest. The alarm bells still echoed. More guards poured into the tunnels below. Daniel pushed himself to his knees, holding the stolen weapon close. "We can't stop. Not until we're out." Her throat was dry, her fear heavy, but she nodded. Something inside her had broken free the moment she struck that guard. She could not go back now. She would not. They pressed on, the tunnels narrowing, the air heavy with dust, voices echoed everywhere. At one turn, 2 guards appeared before them, torches high. The girl froze, terror gripping her again. The guards raised their chains with cruel smiles. Daniel moved first, swinging the stolen weapon. The clash was rough and desperate, his body too weak for grace, but his will drove each strike. One guard stumbled back with a shout. The other lunged, his whip slashing through the air, but before it landed, the girl grabbed a loose chain from the ground and pulled with all her strength. The guard lost balance, crashing hard into the wall. She struck him again and again, rage and fear fueling her until he stopped moving. She stood shaking, chest rising and falling, eyes wide with what she had done. Daniel touched her shoulder, steadying her. "You're not their slave anymore," he whispered. The words echoed in her head as they moved on. She repeated them silently to herself, as if clinging to them could keep her alive. Not their slave. Not anymore. The tunnels grew hotter as they neared the upper levels. Steam hissed from broken pipes, filling the air with choking mist. Torches flickered through the haze as more guards shouted orders. The girl led Daniel through a side passage she had once seen collapsed years ago. Now, cracks in the stone revealed a thin opening. They squeezed through, scraping skin and tearing clothes, until they stumbled into another forgotten shaft. Behind them, the sound of boots grew louder again. There was no rest, no safety, only the burning need to keep moving. At last, they burst into a wide chamber filled with old machines, broken gears, and shattered carts. Chains hung from the ceiling like dead vines. It was a graveyard of forgotten labor, silent except for their gasping breaths. Daniel leaned against a rusted beam, his face pale, but his eyes still alive. "We're close," he whispered. She looked at him, trembling, her hands red and her body weak. She wanted to say she could not go further, that her strength was gone. But when she saw him, broken yet unyielding, she swallowed her fear and straightened her back. For the first time, she believed his words. They were close, and she would not stop until she saw what lay beyond the mines. The chamber was wide and silent, filled with broken machines and rusted chains, but there was a faint sound beyond it, a whisper of moving air. The girl froze, her ears catching it instantly. It was not the heavy, stale air of the mines, but something different, lighter, fresher. Her heart skipped. Could it be? Daniel leaned against a beam, his body trembling, and followed her gaze. His lips curved in a faint smile. "The way out," he whispered. Her chest tightened. For years, she had forgotten the sky. For years, she had buried even the memory of it. Now, just the thought of it made her legs weak. She stepped forward slowly, guiding Daniel toward the sound. Every step was heavy with fear and hope, two feelings that fought inside her like enemies. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing them to crawl through jagged stone. Daniel gritted his teeth, dragging himself despite the pain. She supported him, her thin frame carrying more weight than she thought possible. Dust filled their throats, and sharp rocks tore their skin, but ahead, the air grew cooler. A faint glow replaced the sick green of the crystals. It was not torchlight. It was something purer. At the end of the crawl space, a crack opened to the outside. The girl froze, her breath catching. Through the narrow gap, she saw it, the faint silver light of the moon. Her eyes widened. She reached out with trembling fingers, touching the cool air as if it were alive. She pulled her hand back quickly, afraid it was only a dream. Daniel's voice came behind her, soft but full of wonder. "Go on, touch it, it's real." Tears filled her eyes. She pressed her hand out again, letting the night air wash over her skin. For the first time in years, she felt something that was not chains, not stone, not dust. It was freedom. She turned back, her voice breaking. "It's real?" Daniel's smile widened despite the blood on his lips. "Then let's see it together." They pushed through the crack, the rocks scraping their bodies, until at last they stumbled into the open. The girl fell to her knees, her eyes lifted to the sky. Stars stretched endlessly above, a blanket of shining lights she had forgotten existed. The moon poured silver across the jagged mountains, and the wind carried scents of earth and night flowers. Her tears ran freely, unstoppable. She whispered to herself, I had forgotten the world was this big." Daniel sank beside her, exhausted but alive. His eyes also turned upward, and for a long time they both stayed in silence, breathing the free air. No chains, no guards, no whips, only the endless sky. But freedom came with danger. Behind them, alarms still echoed faintly from the mines. Guards would not stop hunting them. The girl's joy twisted into fear. She turned to Daniel, her voice shaking. "They will come. They will never let us go." Daniel's hand touched hers, steady even in weakness. "Then let them come. We're not going back." Her heart raced. She looked into his eyes and saw it again, that fire that had carried them this far. He had been broken in body, yet his spirit refused chains. And now, standing beside him, she felt her own spirit rising too. The night stretched wide before them, but they had no food, no weapons, and no place to hide. She knew survival would not be easy, yet something inside her refused to kneel anymore. For the first time, she did not see herself as a slave. She saw herself as someone who could fight, who could live, who could choose. They moved slowly down the rocky slope, Daniel leaning on her for support. Every step was painful, but every breath of free air gave them strength. The girl glanced back once at the mine's dark mouth, glowing faintly with torches deep inside. For years, that place had been her world, her prison, her grave. Now, it was only a memory she would never return to. As they reached a patch of grass beyond the rocks, she sank her hands into it, feeling the soft earth between her fingers. She laughed suddenly, a sound that startled even her. It was rusty and broken, but it was laughter. Daniel chuckled softly with her, his voice weak but full of warmth. "I told you," he said. "You're stronger than you know." Her laughter turned to tears again, but this time they were not from pain. They were from life. She wiped her face with dirty hands, whispering, "I don't even know who I am anymore." Daniel looked at her firmly. "You're free. That's who you are." The words struck her deeper than any whip ever had. Free. She whispered it to herself, tasting the word like it was something new. For so long she had been nothing, nameless, faceless, only a shadow in the mines. Now, with the stars above and Daniel beside her, she felt the truth of it. She was free. They kept walking until the mine was only a dark shape in the distance. The cold night wrapped around them, but it no longer felt cruel. For the first time, the girl did not fear the dark. The dark was no longer chains. It was possibility. Daniel stumbled once more, his strength nearly gone. She caught him quickly, pulling his arm over her shoulders. "I won't let you fall," she whispered. He smiled faintly, his eyes heavy but proud. Then neither of us will. They pressed on into the night, their steps uneven, their bodies broken, but their spirits alive. Every star above seemed to watch them, shining brighter as if blessing their escape. The girl lifted her head high, her heart pounding with something new, something she had never dared to feel. Hope. The mines had stolen her childhood, her family, her name. They had filled her with fear, pain, and silence. But now, with the human beside her, she carried something greater. She carried the strength to keep walking, no matter how far, no matter how hard. And as the wind whispered across the hills and the moon lit their path, she knew one truth more powerful than chains, guards, or fear itself. Her life was no longer theirs. It was hers, and it had only just begun.